All right. So I'm just going to go over some little technical details before we go into like the actual conversation and um, a discussion maybe about person-led approach in your communities and your organizations. So um, what is a person-led approach? It's when you decide to support somebody and it's not person-centered. It's different from person-centered because you're not trying to tailor things to them, but you're giving that person the autonomy and empowering them for them to say and decide what it is that they want and need, rather than deciding that for them. And when we think about this concept, you see it in like medicine, for example, where you literally have somebody decide what they want to do, but it can be in every area of somebody's life. So when we talk about advocacy work, it is when you decide to give the people who maybe your organization is advocating for or helping the power for them to decide what it is that they truly need and for them to lead the efforts. So I will explain a little bit about what that looks like in practice and also why we decided to do that. So a couple of years ago, when I joined the board of our organization, we did a survey together with a university to try and find out what was going good and what we needed to work. And so when we did this study, it was really nice to see that all of the awareness efforts were going really well. So people knew what autism was and like what it looks like, that there are levels, etc. But then we got like a shocking number of like almost 95% of the people were like, we know all of this information, but we have no idea what to do with this information. Like, we don't know how to function, we don't know how to integrate people in work, we don't know how to include them at school or anything. So we decided that it was very important to pivot and make a it's fine and make a different decision as to how we're going to move forward to ensure that we are genuinely working towards inclusion and not just awareness anymore, right? So then we decided to take this approach, and we set a goal that we were going to use this approach to anywhere we go. And eventually it led us to the United Nations. If I am honest, I did not think at that moment that that was going to be our goal or that that was where we were going to end up. But it was very nice to see that that is where it took us, because we stuck to this approach and we stuck to this system. So increasing visibility was the first step, right? So if you are working in a culture or a community in which the people that you are working with or working for or helping are not represented out there and they are not visible, it's really hard for them to feel empowered to make decisions and lead movements forward. So we kind of decided that we are going to increase visibility and incorporate it in everything that we do. So we created, to start with, a like ambassadors program. We worked with mainstream media, which was really important as well. And I'm gonna explain a little bit. So in the case of autism, what we did is that we allowed autistic people to lead efforts. So we literally asked them, what is the thing that you are dealing with and that you think needs attention the most? And the first time you ask a question like that, people may have an immediate answer, but if nobody had asked them that question before, it might be a very confronting question. So then you have to work on empowering people that the things that they are encountering is not like, they are bothering others or they are asking for too much. That if you have a need that is not being met, you can talk about it and you can ask for it. And then we had to talk about culturally aware solutions. So we are living in a globalized world where everybody is on TikTok and everybody is seeing things on the internet. And what we noticed in Aruba was that we were getting a lot of United States influence, and issues that were happening there, people were taking as our own, even though it was not the case. So we also had to talk about our cultural reality and what that meant, and means of access, and what you can reach or not reach. So then we had to bridge the communication gaps between stakeholders. So if people think that there aren't any services, you need to let them know that these services exist. So if they ask for something, you need to be able to provide them with the resources that already exist and show them how to get to them. And this is the process of empowerment, right? I'm not going to tell you which resource to use or when to use it, but it's important for you to know what we already have so that we can continue to build on. So that was a very important part for us when we were working on this, because we realized that a lot of people didn't even know what they had access to. They didn't know what their rights were or not, or they assumed that they had certain rights that maybe they didn't. And as an organization who is working on behalf or for a group of people, that is our role, to make sure that the people who need to have access to these things know that they have access to these things. So this was a huge step for us. And then when we finally were able to say, okay, we have community leaders, people that, you know, they have done the work, they feel like they understand our system, they understand our culture, they are able, or they feel they are willing, not necessarily able at that moment, but willing to show up in public spaces and talk about things that bother them. Then we had to work on the second step, and it's making sure that you set them up for success. And what does that mean? So you can say, okay, I'm gonna do a person-led approach and you tell me what you want to do, but if you don't know how to do certain things, I am setting you up for failure. So then the next step was making sure that we provided the ambassadors, or the people who wanted to consult, the people who wanted to participate in discussions about policies and legislations, were empowered and educated to do so. So that meant that if they needed resources such as learning about legislation, we provided that. If they needed to understand how policies are made, we did workshops on that. We talked about explaining, and sometimes it's one-on-one conversations, sometimes it's group conversations. How do you write letters for lawmakers, right? How do you do that? So it's very easy to tell somebody you need to advocate for yourself and not provide them the resources to do so. So we worked on that because we wanted it to be a success. So we wanted to know from them, what is it that you need for you to do this? And then you have to retain commitment, because it's exhausting sometimes if you go from maybe decisions being made for you and you just kind of go with the flow, and maybe you're upset or you don't like the decisions, but you just kind of, you know, go with them, to now being empowered to actually make decisions. It can be exhausting. It can be exhausting because you have to show up for meetings. It can be exhausting because you have to read documents, right? So retaining commitment is going also back to providing the spaces and resources for you to be able to do that. So it can be anything from transportation, making sure that if that is what is holding you back from participating, that is being provided. If you do not know how to communicate with somebody, maybe because you don't know what's the best way to reach them, you bridge that. You make it accessible so that they do not feel that these barriers will stop them from participating. But it also means making sure that you listen to their support group. So if we are talking about young adults who are living in a household with their parents, you're checking in with the parents too. Like, is there something that we can provide you so you can be a good support system for them to advocate for themselves? And maybe, again, simple things like transportation, better scheduling. Are there days and times in the week that work best for you to bring them to a specific location, so that you are tailoring it in a way that is keeping in mind the whole person, not just like maybe accessibility in the sense of making the space sensory friendly, but also the timing of the people who maybe have to bring them, who have to show up with them. And if somebody uses public transportation, you have to keep all those things in mind. And that varies per community, I am sure, but it is very important to keep that in mind, that even if you provide people with all of the tools, you also need to keep their whole life in mind. So if that's work or school. So we did that. And then we started the process of creating opportunities to go into mainstream media. So I know that this is a very diverse group in the sense of like how cultures function, but in Aruba's culture, it was not the norm to have somebody with any form of impairment or neurodevelopmental condition to be out there publicly speaking about that and being on mainstream media. And that meant if they were present in an interview, usually the tone was very tragic, like sad, and trying to appeal to an emotional level. But it was very rare and almost non-existent to have somebody speak for themselves. So we said we're not going to do that anymore. So as soon as we felt like our advocates felt ready, adults of course, and we were invited for interviews, we would support them, of course, but we would let them lead the interviews too and lead the conversations, because they are the ones that know what information or what is the narrative that they want to be, being had in mainstream media. Um, and then when we realized that we can't control, obviously, presenters, right? So we don't know sometimes like what questions they will ask. Sometimes they'll give you the questions in advance, sometimes they won't. And we realized that they still maintained like the very tragic narrative. They would say things like, oh, you suffer from autism, how hard is it? We decided that we were going to create our own spaces where we could fully control the narrative. And that's where we decided to eventually produce our own podcast show for the Autism Foundation. And that allowed us to eventually transition into having the first radio show where a presenter is an openly autistic person who talks about these topics and what he thinks is important. So he comes up with the topics, and it can either be based on discussions that we have either in meetings, but discussions that he has with peers, or things that he is experiencing. And the only thing that we do is help where we can in logistics and maybe finding guests, like communicating with them. So these are ways where I know that sometimes it's hard to say that, oh, but I'm not getting the space. Create the spaces, and create the spaces for the group that you are working for. And that's scary sometimes, but it's worth it, because it also shows that you're walking the talk, where you are saying that we're not just going to wait until we are given certain rights or certain opportunities. We will take them ourselves, and we will create them ourselves. So this kind of then transitions into what the type of work that I personally do. And so when you think of something like lobbying, I don't know if any of your NGOs does that, but we do that a lot. And usually you have maybe lawyers or legislators that go into these meetings, and they have prepared certain points, and maybe they will try to sell it in a way that it's a quick win or a low-hanging fruit for maybe a government or a politician. And so what we decided is that we are going to continue keeping our person-led approach even in this. So if we were invited to consultations on policies or legislations, we would show up as a foundation, but we would always allow the autistic person to lead the conversation and to lead the discussion. And of course, if they themselves felt like they were not knowledgeable enough in a specific topic or in the process of a creation of a policy, that's also fine. Then we worked on the consultation. But it takes effort, because again, like I said earlier, it might mean that you have to educate the people in process that are very bureaucratic, and that takes a special knowledge for you to explain to people. But it is 100% worth it, because then that the things that are being created are tailored to the people who will use them and who will definitely benefit from them. So that is something that we have seen. So now we have a National Autism Committee in Aruba, of which I am the chairperson, and we have all these organizations. And anytime that we have decisions being made in there and we have policies or procedures being developed, we have these consultation moments with, parents, with educators who will end up using, the product or the process or the procedure, and making sure that this will truly be efficient and that resources will be allocated accordingly and correctly based on the actual need, rather than, some ideal framework created in some think tank lab by professionals who might not have, the lived experience that families and autistic people might have. Um, and then we continue this in advocacy too. So we made a very conscious decision to be more inclusive as well and include the neurodiverse community, because we realized that, there are groups that do not have maybe people advocating for them. So that is a decision that we made in our cultural context that was necessary. And we also made sure that we acknowledge process. So we remind people of who is participant in this process, where we, where we went through what we went through in the last couple of years, the steps that we're taking, so that people also understand that change takes time, but it takes continuous effort. And what that does is that it creates a greater buy-in from your community too. So, I decided to share this because I think that what I have encountered with a lot of organizations is that, and I have personally felt it too, it's easier sometimes to, from a professional perspective, be like, oh, but I already know the answer and I'm just gonna write the letter myself, and I'm just going to write the procedure myself or the recommendation myself, and it, might save me more time and be more efficient. And maybe, I don't know, 3 out of the 5 times you might be right as a professional, but I do not think that the 2 out of the 5 is worth not taking the time for, because I don't think that we have the time and space, and it's also not just towards the people who should benefit from these changes, for us to take away that power just for the sake of efficiency or just for the sake of, going faster or moving faster. So what I want us to do right now, after hearing this, is I want to ask you, because I do want to know from your own communities and your own organizations, what are ways that you can, foster and encourage a person-led approach within your own context. And I'm gonna pass around some little post-its and maybe just write like a little sentence. And I want you to think something that you can go back to your NGO on Saturday or Monday, whenever you're traveling, and be like, we're gonna implement this today, because I think that, this is an immediate way, something that I can immediately change, that can contribute to, moving towards a person-led approach and allowing people to advocate for themselves. So yeah, I'm just gonna do that, and then we'll see what you wrote down.